Wednesday, March 9th, 2022, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Today we're going to look at what some call the collapse of the dollar. I would say it's more appropriate to call it the collapse of the major reserve currency status. The dollar will still be around, just like the British pound is still around, despite having been the world's major reserve currency for about a century after the Napoleonic Wars. And I'm also going to recommend right now a really good video about what's going on with the dollar, why the dollar losing its reserve currency status is going to cost not just Americans, but I would also say people in Britain and Europe, because we are dependent on the dollar. We are in a dollar reserve system, and I'm going to come to that in a minute. The video is by a guy actually who I recently started listening to some of his videos, and I recognized the name. One of you sent me the link, and I thought, I know this guy, Gozalo Lira. And why do I know him? Well, because he used to write a lot of good stuff that used to go on Zero Hedge back in about 2010, 2011, and then he just went away. But interestingly, he lives in the Ukraine. He's originally from Chile, but he's married to a Ukrainian, and he's there on the ground. And I highly recommend you watch the first video on his channel. If you go under videos, it's very long, but it explains what's going on in that country. But yesterday he did a video. What is the dollar is the reserve currency, and why it will be poorer now that it's not. And I couldn't have explained it better than him. Basically, and we've said that many times before, that if foreign countries don't need to use as many dollars because they're using other currencies, they're not using the dollar for every transaction, international transaction or trade, there will be less demand for dollars. Less demand for dollars means that the US government can't borrow money as cheaply in the international market, the bond market, and interest rates go higher. Everything goes higher. There's a lot of dollars also flowing back into the US, the supply of dollar as well. So listen to him, and he's spot on, Gozalo Lira, about that. It's not a long video, it's 12 minutes. And unfortunately, it's going to happen in Europe, and we can see it happening in the UK as well, in other countries. So now we're going to look at why America, or the US dollar, the currency of the United States, became so important. Well, there's several factors. Of course, the US economy, in 1870, I think it became bigger than the British Empire economy. But Britain still ruled international trade. But then with World War I, everything changed, and America stayed out of that war for 3/4 of that war. It went in only towards the end in 1917. America provided a lot of stuff for the warring nations, and it did really well in terms of accumulating a lot of gold. The European economies and countries were decimated, most of them, and America was intact. And that led to the 1920s, the roaring 20s. And then, of course, we had the crash of 1929. And then we had the European countries going off gold again because they couldn't keep it. They had a depression. A lot of the capital from Europe went into the US. But I'm going to show you here that it wasn't always the case. And even though America became a very important country economically in the late 1800s, this is what Smedley Butler says here on page 14. take our own case. Until 1898, we didn't own a bit of territory outside the mainland of North America. At the time, our national debt was a little more than $1 billion. Then we became internationally minded. We forgot or shunted aside the advice of the father of our country. We forgot George Washington's warning about entangling alliances. We went to war. We acquired outside territory at the end of the World War period as a direct result of our fiddling in international affairs. Our national debt had jumped to over 25 billion. Our favorable trade balance during the 25-year period was about 24 billion. Therefore, on a purely bookkeeping basis, we ran a little behind year for year, and that foreign trade might well have been ours without the wars. So he goes on to say who benefited from the war, but just wanted to show you that America, I think the move in the early 1900s, especially with World War I, getting entangling with other nations, also the Spanish-American War of 1898, was the beginning of this move towards a major reserve currency. So then we had World War II, of course, another very destructive war. Most of Europe was destroyed, decimated Germany, Eastern Europe. And again, America ended up in the best shape because it was on the other side of the pond, right? And so officially, America became the leader, or the dollar became the major reserve currency through the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944. And why America? Well, as you can see by this chart here, by that time, by the end of World War II, America had about 2/3 of all the world's gold reserves, especially in the West. And so that's, as you can see, it gradually went up, those gold reserves. And the British gold reserves went the other way. And that's why the dollar became the world's reserve currency. The dollar was known in the 40s, 50s, and in the 60s to some extent as good as gold. But unfortunately, as you can see there, those gold reserves started flowing out. And why do they flow out? Well, and they flowed out, of course, mostly into Europe, Japan, and that's what the euro dollar market is. There's a lot of dollars flowing outside the United States. It flowed out because America was running trade deficits. So that's the only reason the U.S. government, the American general, was living beyond its means. So it was paying in gold. And it's one of the reasons why, because that was part of the deal, Bretton Woods. So why are all the other currencies then related to the dollar? I said I'd explain that. Well, because in 1944, the dollar is the center of the monetary universe. You could, if you had dollars, let's say the French Treasury or the German Treasury or UK Treasury or whatever other country that was in the Bretton Woods Agreement, they could take those dollars to the US Treasury and redeem them at a fixed rate of $35 per troy ounce. So if you kept running deficits, the US and other countries' surpluses, they were going to take those dollars and take the gold out. So as you can see here, yeah, America has been running. It's gotten even worse since Nixon closed the gold window in 1971. Well, because the Americans were running out of gold, so they closed it temporarily. And the other currencies, the other major currencies, they were indirectly pegged to gold, of course, because they were their rate to the dollar, their rates were fixed as well to the dollar. Let's say I think $1 was I don't know, 4 or 5 Swiss francs, right? So it was always fixed. And then and then the Swiss had accumulated dollars, they could get the gold. And that's how it worked. And that's why, even to this day, all the exchange rates, all the major currencies go back to that agreement in 1944. So when the dollar loses its reserve currency status and we see all the money flowing back into the US and everything becoming more expensive, it's not just for the dollar, but for all currencies. And that's why we're seeing rising prices everywhere, not just in the US. So there's a French finance minister in the 60s or 70s who said that the United States had the exorbitant privilege of just printing the currency and spending it for anything they wanted outside the United States in international trade, while other countries actually had to work hard and produce things to earn the dollars. And they needed the dollars because, as Gozalo Lira says in this video, if you watch it, someone in India wanted to buy something from Japan. They agreed to do it in dollars because the rupee and the yen were not as stable as the dollar, because the demand for dollars gave it stability as well. But now, as the dollar is really going the way of the old British pound, the British pound of the British Empire that lost its reserve currency, that's all going out the window. And that's one of the reasons why gold and silver are going to continue to do well, because the dollar is just the paper dollar is just a substitute for real money, gold and silver, as Rafi Faber says. Paper currencies were just like something that were used for convenience, but you have to have trust in it that that promissory note will pay you what it says. All that trust, of course, is gone out the window, not only since 1971, but even before that, especially in Europe after World War I, and then in the US after 1933. So I think what's been happening, America and the dollar, their reputation was really good. It grew from the late 1800s, early 1900s, throughout the World Wars period, and in the 40s and 50s. But then America abused that. And there's a note saying, I think it's to this effect: "How did you go bankrupt?" Bill asked. "Two ways," Mike said. "Gradually, then suddenly." So I think that's what's going on now. And countries, or America, won't go bankrupt in the sense that we know. The bankruptcy for America will be the rising cost of living, the fact that Americans will have to start producing more. America as a country will have to start building foreign reserves of other currencies, because some countries might not accept dollars eventually. And now to Putin, because Putin has known this all along. And I'm going to play a little clip here that where he said back in November of 2019, November 16th. And it was at an energy conference, I think, in St. Petersburg. And there were a lot of foreign business people, politicians there. And it's in Russian, but I've got subtitles here. I can tell you what he's saying. So here we go. He's saying the dollar has enjoyed great trust around the world.
Это почти единственная была универсальная валюта мировая.
He said it was the only universal currency in the world.
Зачем-то Соединенные Штаты начали использовать долларовые расчеты как инструмент политической борьбы.
And then he said, for some reason, the U.S. began to use dollar settlements as a tool for political struggle.
Вводите ограничения на использование доллара.
Imposing restrictions on the use of dollars, they began to bite the hand that feeds them. So this is in 2019, November. So he knew what was coming. And he actually said that the dollar would collapse soon. And I think he meant more as a major reserve currency.
Своими руками начали пилить сук, на котором сидят. Но скоро они грохнутся. Доллары сокращаются.
He says they will collapse soon. Many countries in the world began turning away from using the dollar as a reserve currency.
Как резервная валюта во многих государствах мира. Иран ограничивает в долларовых расчетах.
He says they restricted Iran in its dollar settlements.
Но Россия вводит какие-то ограничения.
They imposed some restrictions on Russia and other countries.
Другие страны. Это подрывает доверие к доллару. Неужели это непонятно?
He says this undermines confidence in the dollar. He's trying to warn the U.S. They're destroying the dollar with their own hands, he says.
Своими руками уничтожают.
There you go. So I'll stop here, and they've gone full tilt this year. Of course, they've closed the Russian central bank from access to international markets. All the sanctions, all the private companies now shutting down in Russia. So this is just going to accelerate it. Yes, Russia is going to be hurt. And am I trying to defend anyone here? No, I'm just looking at things, trying to tell you what's going to happen to Americans, to the British, to the Europeans, because our currencies have been pegged. We are a derivative of the dollar from 1944 Bretton Woods. And that's why we are seeing since the end of last year, but especially since the beginning of this year, a lot of money flow into hard assets, because once a currency loses its reserve status, everything becomes more expensive because there's less demand for it. They're going to tell you that commodities are going up for different reasons, but the bigger picture is this. And the same thing happened in Britain. My wife was telling me the other day, she grew up in the 70s. They were feeling the effects of Britain losing the reserve currency status even then. She said they had a lot of shortages here, a lot of inflation, power outages. Is that going to happen in the U.S.? I don't know, but it's going to change. It's not the end of the world. So with that, let's quickly look at where the markets are this morning. It's 20 past 9 a.m. London time. So spot gold right now is at 20.44, down about $5. High's been 20.59, low 20.34. Silver's up 5 cents at 26.43. Range has been 26.78 to 26.28. The Dow futures up 1%, 347 points. The NASDAQ is up 130 or 1%, and so is the S&P. But I noticed yesterday the stock market was very volatile. It was up a few hundred points, and then all of a sudden it was down 100. So yes, interesting. A lot of volatility. The FTSE is up almost 2% at 70.95, and the DAX is up 3.3%, actually 430 points. So it's a little bit of a relief rally for the stock markets right now. The currencies as well are picking back up against the sinking dollar. It sounds weird, but that's what it is. Sterling is up 0.25%, 131.32. The euro is up 1/3 at 109.34. And the dollar is up slightly versus the yen at 115.83. Dollars unchanged versus the Chinese yuan, 632.20. Aussie dollar is up 0.5% at 73.04. The dollar is down 1/3 versus the loonie or Canadian dollar at 128.40. And the Kiwi dollar is up 1/3 at 68.30. To the commodities, WTI crude up 1%, 122.40. Brent crude is up 1.25% at 128, and high-grade copper is down 0.5% at 468.90. So to finish off, let's have a quick look at the bond market. Bond yields have been rising quite significantly, especially yesterday with the stock market down. The 10-year yield was up about 11 basis points. So I think that fact that foreigners don't need as many dollars, and that's not going to happen overnight. I mean, I've been talking about the death or the demise of the petrodollar, which is what people also call the dollar, for the last 5-6 years. And I said that it would be a move like a super tanker changing tack. It takes a while, but I think, as I said, it's accelerating. So this morning, though, the 10-year yield is down just 1 basis point at 1.86%. So there you go. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button. Please share it far and wide. Think about subscribing to my channel if you haven't yet. And you can also follow me on Rumble, Twitter, Facebook, and all these other platforms below here. I wish you all a great day. Take care. Bye.